Something already changed, and you may not have noticed it yet. There is a moment after every full moon when the sky grows quiet. But inside certain people, something loud begins. Tonight, we're talking about Capricorn, and why the days following July 31st may feel unlike anything you expected. By the end of this, you may understand why the brightest night of the month is never really the main event. What comes after it is. Picture a Capricorn waking up on the morning of July 31st. Nothing on the calendar looks unusual. The coffee is the same, the drive to work is the same, the to-do list is exactly where it was left the night before. And yet, something feels different in a way that's hard to name. Maybe it's the light coming through the window. Maybe it's the way a familiar room suddenly feels a little too quiet. Maybe it's a thought that arrives out of nowhere. One about a choice made months ago, or a person who hasn't crossed their mind in a long time. Small things, almost forgettable. Except they don't feel forgettable at all. Have you ever had a morning like that? One where nothing visible has changed, but something underneath the surface has shifted just slightly, like furniture moved an inch to the left in a room you know by heart? For Capricorn, this kind of morning can carry a particular weight, because Capricorn is the sign that plans, the sign that builds, the sign that shows up even when no one is watching and does the work anyway. So when something stirs that has nothing to do with tasks or timelines, it can feel almost foreign, unfamiliar, like a language they used to speak fluently but haven't practiced in years. There's a version of Capricorn that exists mostly for other people. The reliable one, the responsible one, the one who holds things together. And there's another version, quieter, further inside, that rarely gets asked what it actually wants. The days after a full moon have a strange way of finding that second version and gently knocking on the door. What if the answer isn't out there somewhere, waiting to be achieved? What if it's already inside, waiting to be noticed? Let's talk about what a full moon actually represents, and why the moment right after it, not the night itself, may be where the real movement begins. A full moon is often treated like the climax of a story, the brightest point, the peak. But peaks by nature are brief. What matters more is what happens on the way down, because a full moon isn't just illumination, it's also release. It shows you something clearly under bright light, and then it begins to fade, taking with it whatever no longer needs to be carried. Think about a lantern in a dark room. While it burns, everything is visible. Every corner, every shadow, every object you've forgotten was there. But once the light dims, you don't forget what you saw. You just have to decide what to do with it in the dark. That's the symbolism many cultures and spiritual traditions have attached to a moon in its fullest phase. Not accumulation, but release. Not gathering more, but finally being able to see what's ready to be let go. Whether or not you believe the moon holds any influence at all, there's something quietly true about the pattern itself. Clarity often arrives right before a release, not after it. And releases are rarely comfortable. They tend to unsettle the version of us that liked things predictable, which is exactly why so many people report feeling off in the days following a full moon. Not because something is wrong, but because something is finishing. Endings have a bad reputation. We treat them like failures, like doors slamming shut. But every ending is also a doorway. You cannot walk through a door that hasn't fully opened, and a door can't open until the one before it closes. This is where Capricorn's story becomes especially interesting, because if there's one sign that struggles with endings, it's Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by discipline, structure, responsibility. In mythology, Capricorn is symbolized by the sea goat, a creature with the legs of a goat and the tail of a fish. Half of it is built to climb, relentless and sure-footed, capable of scaling the steepest terrain without looking down. The other half is built to dive, to disappear into emotional depths most people avoid entirely. Most of the world only sees the climbing half, the steady one, the one who never seems to slip, never seems to complain, never seems to need anything from anyone. But the sea goat has another half, one that lives beneath the surface, feeling everything the climbing half pretends not to notice. Have you ever met someone who seems completely unshakable and quietly wondered what they're not saying? That's the tension Capricorn carries constantly, the pressure to appear composed, capable, and in control, even while something underneath is asking to be felt instead of managed. This isn't weakness, it's simply a form of emotional armour built over years, sometimes over a lifetime, usually for very good reasons. Somewhere along the way, many Capricorns learned that being needed was safer than being vulnerable. That achievement was easier to offer than emotion, that holding everything together was a way of proving worth. But armour built to protect you can also quietly begin to trap you. After a full moon, that armour sometimes starts to feel heavier than usual, not because it's failing, but because something inside is finally asking to breathe. And that's an uncomfortable, strange, disorienting feeling for a sign that has spent so long being the reliable one. So what does that discomfort actually look like, and why does it tend to intensify, specifically in the days following the brightest night of the month? To understand that, we have to step outside astrology for a moment and look at psychology, because the two, surprisingly, tell a very similar story. Human beings are creatures of pattern. Our brains are wired to prefer the familiar, even when the familiar isn't serving us anymore. This is sometimes called the comfort of the known. Psychologists have long observed that people will often choose a painful but predictable situation over an unfamiliar one that might actually be better, simply because uncertainty feels more threatening than pain does. This is why change, even good change, tends to trigger resistance before it triggers relief. Think about the last time you tried to build a new habit or break an old one. The first few days rarely feel empowering. They feel uncomfortable. Something in you pushes back, clinging to the old pattern like it's protecting you from danger, even when the old pattern is the very thing holding you back. Now apply that to identity, not just habits, but the roles we play. The responsible one, the strong one, the one who doesn't need help. When someone has built years of their self-worth around being dependable, even a small internal shift toward vulnerability can feel like an earthquake. Not because vulnerability is dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar to the brain often gets mistaken for unsafe. This is where the symbolism of the full moon and the psychology of change quietly intersect. Both describe the same human experience from different angles. A moment of illumination, followed by a period of internal resistance, followed eventually by release. The moon doesn't cause this, but it often becomes the mirror people use to notice it. Have you ever resisted something you knew, deep down, you actually needed? For Capricorn, this internal tug-of-war can show up as irritability without an obvious cause, unexpected exhaustion, or a sudden urge to withdraw from people and plans that once felt effortless. It can look like reconsidering a relationship, a job, or a long-held expectation that no longer fits. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because something quiet finally got loud enough to be heard. This isn't a flaw, it's the mind and spirit doing exactly what they're supposed to do when something has outgrown its container. Long before psychology gave language to these patterns, ancient cultures were already watching the moon and noticing something similar. Across different civilizations, Mesopotamian, Chinese, indigenous, Celtic, and many others, full moons were treated not simply as astronomical events, but as symbolic turning points. Times to release what had been carried too long. Times to acknowledge endings before new beginnings could take root. Farmers once used lunar cycles to guide planting and harvest, not because they believed the moon controlled outcomes, but because it offered rhythm, a way of marking time, of honouring cycles rather than rushing through them. Certain traditions held ceremonies at the full moon specifically to release grief, resentment, or exhaustion, treating the fading light afterward as a kind of permission to let go. None of this is presented here as proven fact. These are old stories, old patterns, old ways that different cultures use to make meaning out of the sky. But there's something worth sitting with in the fact that so many unrelated traditions across centuries and continents arrived at a similar idea. That the moon's fullness invites release, not accumulation. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's shared human psychology projected onto the sky, or maybe it's something less easily explained. That part is left entirely up to you. What we can say is this: whether you view the moon as a spiritual force or simply a beautiful symbolic timekeeper, the emotional pattern people describe after a full moon tends to be remarkably consistent. A quiet settling, a subtle clarity, a sense of finally seeing something they'd been avoiding. So what might that look like specifically for Capricorn in the days following July 31st? Some describe a strange, unfamiliar stillness. Not sadness, not anxiety, just quiet. As if the noise that usually fills their mind has finally turned down its volume. In that stillness, priorities can shift almost without warning. Something that felt urgent a week ago might suddenly feel unimportant. Something ignored for months might suddenly feel impossible to put off any longer. Conversations may surface unexpectedly, with people from the past or with people close by who say something that lands differently than it would have a week earlier. A comment that once would have been brushed aside might instead feel oddly significant, almost like it was time to arrive. There can be a noticeable release of expectations, not just expectations placed by other people, but the ones Capricorn quietly places on themselves. The pressure to have everything figured out, the pressure to never need rest, the pressure to keep proving something to someone who may not even be watching anymore. And in the space that opens up when those expectations loosen, something else tends to grow, not loudness, not a dramatic transformation visible to everyone else. Something far more internal, a steadiness that doesn't need applause, a confidence that doesn't need to explain itself, a perspective shift where success starts being measured less by achievement and more by peace. Isn't it strange how the biggest shifts rarely look impressive from the outside? Renewed motivation may appear too, but not the frantic, prove it to everyone kind Capricorn is used to. A calmer motivation. One rooted less in fear of falling behind and more in genuine curiosity about what actually feels meaningful now, at this point in their life, rather than what once felt necessary. All of these signs point towards something larger, something that isn't really about the moon at all, but about what the moon simply helps illuminate. Because here's the truth, this entire journey has been circling. The biggest shift Capricorn may be moving toward isn't external. It's not a new job, a sudden windfall, or a dramatic life event arriving on schedule. It's something quieter, and in many ways far more significant. It's the slow internal decision to stop earning rest, to stop treating worth as something that has to be constantly reproven, to start choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice, even in small invisible ways nobody else will ever see. This kind of confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It shows up in the way someone finally says no without over-explaining, in the way they let a room stay quiet instead of filling it with reassurance for someone else's comfort, in the way they choose peace over approval, even when approval used to feel like survival. If that description feels a little too familiar, that's not an accident. This isn't really a video about the stars. It's a mirror, dressed in astrology, asking you to look a little closer at yourself. So let's slow down for a moment. Everything we've explored tonight, the symbolism of the full moon fading, the psychology of resistance and release, the ancient traditions of letting go beneath a bright sky, the quiet armour Capricorn wears and sometimes longs to set down. all of it points toward the same gentle truth. Real transformation rarely arrives with fireworks. It arrives in silence, in small decisions. In the moment someone finally stops asking the world for permission to feel what they already feel. If you've been carrying something heavy, a role, an expectation, a version of yourself built more for others than for you, maybe the days ahead aren't asking you to fix it immediately. Maybe they're simply asking you to notice it, to sit with it, to let the light show you what it's shown you, and then, slowly, to let it go. You don't have to have this figured out tonight. You don't have to know exactly what's shifting or why. Some changes take weeks to fully reveal themselves. Some take months. What matters right now isn't the destination. It's the willingness to keep listening to that quiet voice underneath the noise. Because that voice has probably been there for a long time, patient, steady, waiting for a moment exactly like this one to finally be heard. If any part of this felt like it was speaking directly to you, it probably was. Not because the moon reached down and wrote it specifically for you, but because these patterns of resistance, release and quiet growth are deeply universally human. You are not imagining what you're feeling, and you are certainly not alone in feeling it. The biggest shift was never something waiting to happen to you. It was something quietly waking up inside you. And maybe, just maybe, it already has. If this resonated with you, type the word shift in the comments below, so we know this reached exactly who it needed to. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming for the next zodiac sign and the next chapter of this story neither of us can fully see yet. Because sometimes the most powerful change isn't the one you're waiting for, it's the one that's already begun.